Ethan, what are your thoughts on the Big Ten going after the Texas market, TCU and Texas Tech? I think they are in a fairly large market. Not really. TCU is, not Texas Tech. And the recruiting would be good to have for Nebraska. Well, if I can throw in my 2 cents first, yes, TCU is in the Fort Worth complex, Dallas Fort Worth. So yes, large TV market, but
Beautiful.
I got to somewhat put that on hold when there's an NFL team involved. So it's one thing to be Utah in the Salt Lake City market or Ohio State in the Columbus, Ohio market with no NFL team. It's different being Washington in the Seattle market or, Maryland in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore markets. It's completely different. So they don't command that kind of attention, especially the Dallas Cowboys. And number 2, Texas Tech's in the middle of nowhere. So then my other thought is that the Big Ten's not doing Nebraska any favors. And I don't mean that to mean that the Big Ten doesn't want Nebraska to succeed, but they're not making conference-wide decisions to help Nebraska in recruiting. That's not what it's going to come to. It's going to come down to this. Can those schools' football programs make them money? My answer would be no.
And do they meet the academic
yes.
standards of the Big Ten? Side note though, did you see that Texas Tech did just announce a brand new $200 million football facility that they're going to build?
Very good.
The one Nebraska is building had a price tag of 160 pre-COVID. So it would be kind of interesting to see what that price tag would be today. But you know what? There's pretty much zero chance that either one of those institutions would join would be asked to join the Big Ten. Right now you see in what they've added, and everything depends on the SEC. Okay, the SEC has 16 teams right now with the additions of Oklahoma and Texas. Now the Big Ten has 16 teams with the addition of USC and UCLA. So the Big Ten's not going to add anybody else until the SEC makes another move. Vice versa. Now the wild card in this, all that everybody knows, is Notre Dame.
Yeah,
and what nobody really knows. I mean, the latest I've heard with Notre Dame is that they're not worried about making any kind of a move until the mid 2030s, like 2034, maybe at the earliest. So, who knows? And then you got to think about right now that, okay, there are negotiations going on right now for the second part of the Big Ten television package, which we all know is worth tons and tons of money. Now, Fox is entrenched in half of that, or maybe a little more than half of that. And ESPN was the other entity that was involved. But the contract's up for grabs right now, and the price tag is going skyrocketing up and up once you added UCLA and USC, because now the Big Ten controls the top 3 television markets in the country. And the state of Texas really doesn't even equate into that, especially when you talk about those 2 teams. So right now, with the addition of those 2 schools to the Big Ten, the price tag is going crazy. And now you see other entities trying to throw their hat into it. Obviously ESPN's one of them bidding on it. But now you've got even like Apple TV has even thrown their hat into it. And then obviously CBS is one that's there, and the new one is NBC. All of a sudden NBC is extremely interested, which maybe might tell you something about the whole Notre Dame angle right there too, if you want to go into conspiracy theory type talk. So, this is a whole moving machine right now that we're not going to know really where it all stops at. But, to make a long story short on to answer the question is that I could never see those two schools from Texas being in the Big Ten. It just doesn't work out on paper.
2034 before Notre Dame makes a decision.
Yeah, I
Wow.
heard. Yeah, I mean,
I heard something like that too.
Yeah, and it's just like, I don't know if that's Notre Dame just taking their stance that they've always had, but sooner or later, you know what? You're gonna get left out. I don't care how long that you can survive on your NBC deal and stuff like that. And all your traditional games that Notre Dame fans have drooled over year in and year out don't happen anymore. So I think I got to think the Notre Dame fan base is about ready for a change, and the ACC is just not going to cut it.
Well, I agree with you that Notre Dame should make a decision sooner rather than later to have a better control over their situation as opposed to what might be dictated to them 10 years from now. That's as long as the powers that be, the conferences, would freeze them out. As long as the conferences supply Notre Dame with games and they're selected with a good record into the playoff, then they're fine.
But their avenue to the playoff is severely hurt by not being in a conference now with the way things are ending up. And there was a very interesting conversation I heard earlier today that is the Big Ten putting Notre Dame on notice and giving them a deadline to say, hey, we want in? I don't think so, personally. I think Notre Dame knows the Big Ten wants them. I mean, obviously, the SEC wouldn't say no to Notre Dame either. But, I mean, I don't think the Big Ten would give an ultimatum on, say, hey, you got to make a decision right now. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't think the Big Ten is going to add another school in until the SEC adds another school or two into the SEC as well. Right now, the SEC kind of rules the whole world in college football in that way. And obviously, the Big Ten is right there with them. But either one. I mean, the SEC is the one that's bold enough to say, hey, we're going to expand another. We're going to add two more, and we're going to go to 18, and then two more, we're going to go to 20. The Big Ten is just going to follow suit, and it's the SEC's move to add more at this point.
Well, I've made this statement, and I'm not stating this like it's gospel truth. This is just my perspective, and this is my guess. My estimated guess is that the Big Ten and the SEC are basically looking at two things. Of course, money, but below that, the breakdown of the money is the evaluation of, okay, the SEC stands currently with 16, the Big Ten with 16. Let's say Notre Dame does say, we want to stay independent, we're good, and they take themselves completely out of the market. If the SEC looks at the field, obviously the Big Ten made the last move. If the SEC stands pat, doesn't do anything, I don't expect the Big Ten to do anything. I think there's a counter punch momentum to this.
Exactly.
That, okay, they just added like if the SEC would go out and grab Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and North Carolina and go to 20, then the Big Ten would probably want to do something about that.
Absolutely, they would. And you'd probably see, the scenario like Notre Dame, Oregon, Stanford, Washington, maybe
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it's going. So Notre Dame's not going to have any choice sooner or later, because who are they going to play? Because all these teams are in the same conference, and you're not going to have as many non-conference games anymore.
Why? Sure you are.
Well, I think they're going to make it 10 conference games. Well, maybe not 10, but 9 maybe.
Well, they already play 9 in the Big Ten,
that's
in the
true.
Pac-12, in the Big 12. I think it all depends. I can't answer your question whether Notre Dame's in trouble or not. I think they could be in trouble if the leagues get together and say, Notre Dame is the only school playing big-time football that goes by its own rules. If they refuse to join a conference, we're going to freeze them out. Don't schedule them. Leave them out. They need to play by the same rules. But if the conferences and the individual schools continue to let Notre Dame do whatever they want, then they're going to continue to schedule games because
Yeah.
the conferences and the individual schools within the conferences make money when they schedule Notre Dame.
Exactly. That's the whole point is that, hey, I mean, you're going to sign a home and home with Notre Dame. I mean, you're going to make a ton of money when they come to your place. So, yeah. But my point is that those opportunities get farther and fewer if they don't join one of these two mega conferences.
Maybe.
Notre Dame's just got to get over being Notre Dame, in my opinion.
I completely agree. I don't blame Notre Dame for taking that stand. I blame everybody else for letting them.
They're the only school that has their own television deal. So that kind of dictates that, hey, you know what? We're good. Let us play the field. But I think in the end, though, the money has got to be more than what their NBC contract is paying. Especially if NBC gets the rights to the other part of the Big Ten television deal right now. Which, I mean, it's hard for me to even think that ESPN would let that happen. Because, I mean, ESPN's not stupid, and they know they know what's going to make them money as well. So it's just such a high price tag these days on everything. It's just mind-boggling.
So just to finish my point, I think that it's going to come down to basically the two leagues counter punching. And then the number two thing is that if the Big Ten or the SEC gets to a point where they look at the rest of the field and there's nobody else out there of value that's going to add value, then they're going to say, we've got our 20, we're good, or we got our 22, or whatever the number ends up being, and there's nobody else that adds value to our league.
Yeah, that's you know what? What does that tell you? Is like, you know what? You better jump on the opportunity when you have it, because when all those spots fill up, what are you going to do now?
Yes. And that's another big question, because let's say see if you agree with me here. The Big 12's kind of the Big 12 has actually kind of protected itself in a weird way, because they get a 14-team conference. They get a 14-team. No, they'll have a 12-team conference when they add the 4 from the American Conference. They'll have 12 teams. Let's say they go out and they get like a Utah, Colorado, Arizona State. They get up to 16 or 18.
They're gonna have to. Yeah.
They get up to 16, let's say. None of those programs most likely are good enough or have the kind of value that the SEC or the Big Ten would want them.
Not even close.
So they're not going to get picked off, but they have a strong enough league with strong enough programs to at least have a viable competitive league that's going to make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a Florida State. They don't have a Miami. They don't have a Clemson to get picked off.
Yep. No, I mean, it's kind of a sad situation when you think about that, and even think about the SEC or the ACC. You still might have a couple of bell cows in there, like a Clemson at the moment. Miami might be on their way back. I mean, things are looking good there. Florida State looks like they're on the uprise as well. So you could actually have some pretty powerful schools in there. The SEC looks at this as they're looking at recruiting grounds. That's why you're hearing, North Carolina and Virginia are two targets for the SEC, because they want those states. They want to recruit those states, increase their footprint in the recruiting world. So that's a factor that you always have to look at. They've already got Florida in the SEC, so they've got their foot in Florida, no problem. And obviously, Florida's in the Southwest or in the Southeast. So clout-wise, Miami, Florida State doesn't really ring true on the recruiting side, but that's why they're targeting schools like North Carolina. I mean, because there's a lot of talent that comes out of North Carolina and a ton of talent that comes out of the state of Virginia. But right now, as things stand, the University of Virginia is second fiddle to Virginia Tech in recruiting the area. But a change to the SEC would probably make a big difference in recruiting at Virginia. So, yeah, there's a lot of different factors that go into these moves on getting schools that people don't really think about with the recruiting angle. And it's all about a footprint there where you can get in there and recruit states where usually you're not very good at recruiting and don't have a lot of connections there, high school coach wise and stuff to be able to be in on some of those recruits that you would like to be able to recruit, but don't have a chance to right now.